We're going to talk about something I have never heard about on Easter Sunday. In my memory, maybe some of you have, but it's a conversation that goes on at the crucifixion and through the resurrection. It's a conversation that goes on that is just remarkable. It's just bizarrely remarkable, and we never talk about it. And so this week I thought I'm going to go back and look at this because this is just really odd. And what are we talking about? It's one of the shortest conversations in the entire part about the resurrection. And here I'm going to use a bunch of pictures from a painter named Tissot, who painted during the end of the 19th century. Great guy. He went to Israel, took pictures in his brain, and then painted these things. Here's the conversation we're going to talk about. This is from Luke 23, verse 39 is where we'll pick up. One of the criminals who was hanged there was hurling abuse at him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." And by the way, Messiah means this supernatural king. This king who was promised from centuries past, a king who would rule, whose power would be bigger than anyone else's power, whose reign would never end. So that's Messiah. When you think Messiah, think the big supernatural ruler king, okay? So this one guy on the cross is saying, "Aren't you the Messiah? If you are, save yourself." And it's kind of mocking. Then across the other side, the other one answered, rebuking him, saying, "Hey, do you not even fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation?" It's like you're getting ready to die. What are you doing? Well, and then the conversation goes on. And same guy says, "We indeed are suffering justly for what we are receiving, what we deserve for our deeds. We're getting what we paid for. We were thieves, and this is our due. We deserve this." And then he goes on and says, "But this man has done nothing wrong." And somehow he knew that about Jesus. Then this is where the conversation gets astonishing. "Jesus, remember me when you come in your kingdom." Oh, what? Remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus answers to him, verse 43, and he says, "Truly I say to you, today you shall be with me in paradise." Now I submit to you, every time I've read that, I've thought, what? And it gets odder if you read the other Gospels. The other Gospels are their eyewitness accounts, just like this one is in Luke. Luke is actually writing, Luke probably did not see this event, but he went and interviewed. We know lots of people who were first-hand witnesses, and he wrote it for them. The other ones are also eyewitness accounts. They say something slightly different, which makes this look really stranger. And take a look at this. So let me show you what the other ones say. This is from Matthew 27. It's almost identical to Mark's on this entire thing. Matthew 27, verse 38. "At that time, 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left," and I skipped to 44, "and the robbers who had been crucified with him also were insulting him with the same words," these critical words. You notice is it singular or plural for robber? Robbers. So, if you believe that the Bible is full of inconsistencies and someone made an error where 2 of them are insulting him here, but in Luke only 1 is, that's probably not correct. It's probably the fact that at the beginning of the crucifixion, both robbers on right and left are insulting Jesus. Because it says robbers plural. And yet something changes so that before the robber on the right dies, he professes faith in Christ. Now, here's the interesting question. This is the one I've grappled with for years. What changed? What did this guy see while he was crucified on the cross? What did he see that changed his entire mind about Jesus? So that's what I want to look at this morning. What did he see that would do that? And so this is what he says. But this is what's contained in his statement. I want you to look at this carefully. He says, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom," which means Jesus to him is a king. He's a king. But if he's a king, then he also has a kingdom, and his kingdom isn't going to be now, it's going to be after death, because they're both going to be dead in a short amount of time. So he understands he's a king. He understands his kingdom is probably going to happen after death, which by itself is an amazing statement. And then with that whole thing about his kingdom coming after death, comes these other things. That means that this king can conquer death. So death is not the end of the road for him or for us. He seems to be able to rule in this kingdom, whatever it is that comes after death. It seems as though death is not going to have any effect on him. He has more power than death itself. And on top of that, another thing comes with that. Somehow his suffering must be required. And why? Well, if he's a king, and he's all sovereign, and his kingdom is coming after he dies, then what in the world is he doing putting up with all this suffering? If he can conquer death, then why is he putting up with this suffering? So, logically, this king must need to suffer for a reason I don't understand. It looks, at the surface, it looks voluntary. Jesus' suffering and his death looks voluntary. If he's a king who's sovereign and his kingdom is to come past death and he conquers death, the suffering must be voluntary. And a couple more things he's saying in this. He says, remember me when you come in your kingdom. Notice he doesn't claim any qualifications. In fact, he knows that his qualifications are really bad. And how does he know that? He's on a cross. His qualifications, the thief's qualifications, are horrible. I mean, he is so bad in that sense that not only is he not going to make it into this king's kingdom because he's not worthy, but he's not going to make it into the next kingdom either. I mean, he's a bad guy. So how is it possible? How is it possible that because I'm unworthy, I can ask to be part of this kingdom? And that's one of the astonishing things, because right after that, just in asking, he understands that somehow he's invited to this kingdom. Because he says, basically, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. That's either totally off the wall, whack out crazy, because this guy's clearly a sinner according to Roman standards. I mean, he's being killed for what he's done. But to ask this king who has more power than death itself, whose kingdom is going to come after death, who clearly could conquer suffering as well as death, and his suffering is voluntary, should I even ask? But somehow he knew he was invited. So this is what's all encapsulated in what he says right here. And it's astonishing. I mean, if someone heard him saying to this guy, to Jesus in the center, saying, when you come into your kingdom, remember me, someone on the ground is going to say, what do you mean kingdom? This guy's going to be, worm food in a couple of hours. Kingdom? Come on. That's nuts. That's nuts. But this guy on the cross started by criticizing Jesus, criticizing his reputation as the anointed Messiah, king, do everything kind of guy, supernatural. He's actually abusing him with these kind of critiques with everybody else, and then he changes. So if you were on the cross with him, and what you could see from the cross, and what you'd see would go on that afternoon, why would you change your mind? Let's find out. Okay? What changed his mind? So let's get up on the cross and we'll find out. Let's start with this whole thing about Jesus as being king. It might have started from that plaque that's on the top of Jesus' cross. There's a plaque up there. Classically, in Roman law, what you would do is you would put the offenses of the person up on that plaque. So if they were a thief, it would put a thief. If they were a traitor, traitor to Rome, all that kind of stuff. The plaque on Jesus' cross says this, though, in John 19:19. Pilate also wrote an inscription, put it on the cross. It was written, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. The King of the Jews. The King of the Jews. So if he's wondering what the charge is against this guy, he knows what the charge is. He's claiming to be a king, and they're killing him for it. So he's not on the cross because he stole something, like the two guys on either side. He's not on the cross because necessarily it's high treason or anything. It's not any of this stuff. He didn't murder anybody. He's there because he's claiming to be a king. Now, the Jews got really bent out of shape because of this sign. They hated this. Well, let me show you what they thought. This is what they thought. John 19:20. Therefore, many of the Jews read this inscription, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and in Greek, so everyone could read it. So the chief priests of the Jews were saying to Pilate, don't write the King of the Jews, but that he said, I am the King of the Jews. See that? Don't write the King of the Jews, but that he said he was. He said he was. And of course, if you're a Bible scholar, you know what Pilate's response was. We're leaving it the way it is, King of the Jews. Now, interestingly enough, with these leaders, these religious leaders who didn't buy into anything Jesus was saying about himself as Messiah, these religious leaders have here testified to everyone who's around there that Jesus himself claimed to be the King of the Jews. He claimed to be the King of the Jews. Now, people would either accept that or they wouldn't accept that. Clearly, he's being crucified because many in power didn't accept that. But his enemies are themselves saying, he said he was King of the Jews. So now the thief on the cross is thinking, wait, the sign says this guy's being crucified because he's the King of the Jews. His enemies down here are saying, yes, he did indeed claim to be the King of the Jews. So if his enemies say it, Jesus must have said it. Not his supporters, his enemies. So now the guy on the cross is thinking, wow, my crime was stealing. His crime, he claimed to be the King of the Jews. Now, when you say King of the Jews, you're saying Messiah. You're claiming to be the supernatural king and ruler of the entire Jewish nation, the culmination of all the promises in the Old Testament, starting from Abraham on, the one who would be born in David's house, that is related to David, the good king of Israel, related to him, which would mean, by the way, you'd have to be born in Bethlehem, which he was. You'd have to claim a lot of things. So this guy's thinking, wow, this guy is being killed because he's a king. I wonder if he really is a king. Maybe he is a king. And as you stay on that cross, you continue to observe what you can observe, and you make your case. Is this guy really a king? Matthew 27:41. In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and the elders, were mocking him, saying, he saved others, he cannot save himself. The principal characteristic of the promised Messiah, King of Israel, would be that he would save Israel. And in fact, throughout his entire life, Jesus has saved people by healing them and doing so many other things. And his reputation is legendary. In fact, when he comes into Jerusalem at the beginning of the Passion Week, he comes in, we have Palm Sunday and all that kind of stuff, and blessed he who's come in the name of the Lord and all that kind of stuff. But when he comes in, it says that the people that are there largely because of the miracles he did, right? And then in another gospel, it says, not just any miracles, the miracle of raising Lazarus. That's why they were there. That happened just within a week of that time. So clearly, the crowds understand that Jesus saves people. And they know that. And here, right here, his enemies again are testifying to the fact that here's the one not only who claimed to save others, but who did save others. His worst enemies are testifying in his behalf, mockingly. He saved others, that is, he raised Lazarus from the dead, so he can't save himself. See the criticism? But in the criticism, they're actually laying foundations for the evidence that this guy has supernatural powers, which the king has to have. And he's been demonstrating it in public ministry for 3 years. Maybe he heard this in the crowd that day. Mark 15. This is Pilate speaking to the crowds. Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews? This is the charge. This is Jesus' crime, to claim to be the King of the Jews. And that he himself said so. And everyone recognized this, except the religious leaders, whose authority would be horribly overwrought if he was the king. Because if this guy is the King of the Jews, then every religious authority inside Jerusalem, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all these guys who had power over the people because of their religion, they would have to submit to this Galilean. And they're never gonna do that. Ever. Ever. Sure, he saved some people and he did some miracles and he did all this kind of stuff. But hey, we're going to take him down. We're going to prove he's no king. We're going to prove he's no king. Let's kill him. And we'll finally get rid of him. And yet, because he was such a threat, they're acting like he is the supernatural king because of the threat. Let's push on. Maybe some things that convinced this thief on the cross is what he could see from the cross. This is Tissot's very famous picture of the view from Jesus. It's the first POV from the cross I think I know of. But point of view. But as he looks across the crowd of people that are there, and we don't know more than just a few that are at the feet of the cross, I'm convinced that there were so many at a distance who were watching. And as the thief looked across the entire crowd of the people who came to witness this, of course, in the front, you've got the guys who are against Jesus, right? The Romans, the religious authorities, all that kind of stuff. But in the background, a little more timid, was probably a collection of people. And as you looked across that collection of people, he could see, well, there's a tax collector. There are dirtbags. Well, there's a prostitute. There's a whole group of prostitutes over there. Well, they're horrible people. There's a guy who owes all money to everyone in the world. He's a horrible person. And as he looked across, suddenly, he would realize that this king has citizens, and they're here at his death. And the amazing thing is, none of them are people of repute. That's really odd. In fact, we'll look at in just a second who these people are. There was a kingdom after his death. How do we know this? Well, actually, it only makes sense logically that if he calls him a king, his kingdom's got to be after he dies. But we actually find out when we read the other passages that that's exactly what Jesus said. Here he is in front of Pilate before he's crucified in John 18. And he says to Pilate, Jesus answers, actually Pilate asks him, are you a king? And Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. Well, that's actually if he's thinking on the cross, which, by the way, is hard to do. But if he's thinking on the cross, he's thinking, wait a second, just last week, I might have seen Jesus come across the Mount of Olives as he made his grand entry into Jerusalem at the beginning of the Passion Week, and he was surrounded by hundreds and actually potentially thousands of people. A good-sized, grassroots army, if you wanted to. If they wanted to, and Jesus' realm and his kingdom was right now, those people probably would have had a riot on their hands and would have stopped this. But they understood something that Jesus told Pilate. This place and time is not my kingdom. It's after this. It's after this. And that's exactly what Jesus says. If my kingdom was here, the people who are following me, and there's a lot of them, they would be fighting for me right now. And as the thief on the cross looks around, there's nobody fighting for Jesus. What happened? But there they are, all in the background watching. Jesus could have mustered a very formidable army. Just like today, when you have problems with the governments, local governments and countries and stuff like that, people rise up and say, we're not going to put up with this anymore. Sure, the government has all the tanks, and they seem to have all the guns, and they have all the power, and blah, 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 all down on the list like that, but we're going to rise up and do what's right. And if you have enough people, and this is proven in history, if you have enough people, you can actually challenge the establishment. They would have been doing that right here. But they understood that Jesus' kingdom wasn't of this time and place, many of them. And here he tells Pilate that. Well, his kingdom's after death, which means that he can conquer death. He can conquer death? Well, if his kingdom is in order after death, think about it. Wouldn't you like to follow a king who can never be killed, who for him death means nothing? I mean, death is just a page turn in a continuum of life. He can conquer death itself. We have some evidence of that as well. Also, if that's true, then his suffering is required. It's voluntary, but it's required for something else. Now, this is one of the most startling passages in the Bible as well. Jesus comes to Mary and Martha after Lazarus, their brother, has died. He waits a couple days. He delays coming. Mary and Martha are there. They're really ticked because they discover that Jesus waited. And Martha comes out to Jesus before he gets into the village to take him down, kind of. And when she comes to him before she gets to the village, it's mourning because of Lazarus. She says, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. If you had been here, he wouldn't have died. Well, fortunately, Jesus did actually delay deliberately 2 days. And in that, some amazing discussions happen, as well as the raising of Lazarus. But one of those discussions is what he says to Martha right here. On the road, outside of the village, Jesus says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? So what's the qualification of being able to conquer death for you or I? Belief. But belief in what? That Jesus is a historical figure? No. That he is the sovereign, supernatural king, the anointed one promised from the Old Testament, who himself can conquer death. And if you believe in who he is, then you can join in his resurrection out of that. But if there's no belief, that's off. That doesn't work. That's what Jesus is saying. If you believe, he who believes in me will live even if he dies, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? So Jesus clearly is telling Mary and Martha, now here, maybe just a few weeks before the crucifixion itself, he's saying, I've got death taken down. I'm in charge of death. You don't have to worry about it. I don't have to worry about it. I've got it covered. I'm a master of death itself and life that comes after. And she says to him, yes, Lord, I have believed that you are, there it is, the Messiah. I believe you're that supernatural king, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. So where'd he come from? Out of this world. You mean like space? No, like heaven, like the place where God lives in that sense. He came into the world, and we find from Jesus' discussion with Pilate later and others, he says, I came into this world for this very purpose, to die. To die. So it is a required thing. It's a required thing that he die, and very voluntary, and the purpose of his life altogether. That's what he says. Well, now, he goes on in his thinking, and he thinks, well, I'm unworthy. What am I going to do about this? So what do? You're on the cross? You probably figure, well, I've got to do something pretty good now so I can impress this king, and he'll think good of me, and then he'll invite me into his kingdom. Yeah, so I can't do anything. Nothing. I can't do anything. Nothing. The state of Rome thinks he's sinful and dirty and a dirtbag. Rome, which is corrupt and understands that this thief is bad, how is he ever going to impress this King of Kings and Lord of Lords who conquers death itself? Nothing. I can't do anything. I can't even be witty on the cross because you don't have your thoughts about you. I know a lot of people who try and talk themselves into and out of situations. You know those people? Some of them are here. No eye contact. But I mean, who talk themselves into and out. They can talk themselves into any situation, but he's not going to be able to do that with this king. What do I do to impress the king with my worthiness for his kingdom? Absolutely zero. Zero. But somehow he's invited. And I think, again, as he looks over the crowd, that's the message he's getting as he looks at the crowd. Especially the ones in back. I see tax collectors who turn in their neighbors and their friends for the purposes of money from Rome. They side with Rome in every single way. You see prostitutes. You see thieves. You see corrupt politicians. You see people who come from completely unworthy backgrounds seem to be here mourning that this man, this king, is dying. How is it that these people see him as their king? They don't qualify at all. And chief among them is this woman down at the bottom of the picture. Standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Now she was famous. But you know what? In the entire Bible, everything we know about Mary Magdalene, except for her appearances at the crucifixion, everything we know about her is right in this verse. So if you've heard more about Mary Magdalene, you have to question it and look, because this is about all we know. But this is important because we do know this. We do know that in Luke 8, the 12 were with him, with Jesus, and also some women who had been healed of evil spirits and sicknesses. And Mary, who was called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out. That's what we know. By the way, this picture right here, I love this. This is actually a statue. It's a statue that is carved out of wood. It was made 30, 40 years before Columbus came to America. And you have to go to Florence, Italy to see it today. But he carves a very non-flattering view of Mary Magdalene because Mary Magdalene came out of a very unflattering background. She had 7 evil spirits. And if you read the New Testament and you see what happens when someone has these evil spirits in them, it's horrible. And it's very public. And it's demeaning and it's wasting and it's self-destructive. So when Donatella did this statue right here, he decided to show her what she looked like right after she came out of all that. Wasted and used up and ruined by this spiritual savagery that was going inside her life. People who had demons in them in the New Testament were very public. Many times they would fall down in public and writhe there. They would say nasty, horrible things. They would hurt themselves with stones. Remember that guy that lived across Lake Sea of Galilee, the demoniac guy over there? Had legion inside of him. Yeah, he was naked. He was hopping from tomb to tomb in a graveyard. They tried to chain him and it didn't work. He broke the chains. He was hitting himself with rocks. He was self-destructive. And Jesus freed him from all that. But the point is this. For that man and for Mary Magdalene, this experience of being inhabited by these spirits was a very public thing. This person is self-destructive and abused because of the spirits in her. And that was Mary Magdalene's reputation. Some people try and tie Mary Magdalene back the chapter before this in Luke, where we talk about this unnamed woman who was very sexually permissive, and a lot of people like to tie them to as the same person. I sort of doubt it. She wasn't named in Luke 7, the chapter before, and I would think that if Luke knew her name, he would have said who it was in Luke 7, because he uses her name in Luke 8 right here. But that doesn't matter. Mary Magdalene comes out of a nasty, public, nasty reputation. And as the thief is looking down in front of him And he sees this woman who at one time looked like this and now has been transformed to a woman at peace. A woman who has no qualifications. In fact, her qualifications are all negative. And yet he did this. And now she, along with the tax collectors and the rest of the prostitutes in town and everyone who doesn't have a reputation, are there mourning over the death of their king. So if they were invited, I wonder if I'm invited. See? If they were invited, especially her, I bet you I'm invited. And I think that's what made his question come to life. And then he looks all across the back there and he tallies every single dirtbag who he's ever known in his entire life, including the unrepentant dirtbags down here on horses, the unreasonable and the selfish-oriented leaders. And he sees all those people back there, and maybe he heard Jesus at one time say this very important thing in Mark 2. They asked him, why are you eating and drinking with tax collectors and sinners? By the way, sinner is it's a code word for sexual sinners, prostitutes, stuff like that. So why is he eating with these people, drinking with them, tax collectors, sinners? And hearing this, Jesus said to them, it's not those who are healthy who need a physician, but those who are sick. I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners. If he heard that, and he saw the people gathered at this crucifixion of Jesus, he understands that the citizens of this kingdom are the broken people. And as he lays there in front of all these people on the cross, he says to himself, I'm a broken person. I have no way of fixing my brokenness. I'm in my last hours of my life. There's all these broken people that Jesus came to be the king of, who've repented of their sins, who chose to set their entire lives after following him. If they can be in his kingdom, maybe I'm invited to. I'm qualified because I'm broken, just like these people. All the people in front of him who were not repentant about who they were, I'm talking about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Roman powers and everyone that's there who's proud about the fact that they are self-made people and they are people of great repute. They clearly are not part of this king's kingdom because they're not acting like it. They're actually killing him. They're killing him. Here is a king from promised old who came with powers supernaturally from God himself. He came into the world in order to save, starting now, both in healings and redemption, the freeing from spirits, but then forever. And this king came to call people who were broken and not people who had it all together. And I think on that basis, the robber on the cross is saying, I don't qualify, but I do, because I don't. See? I think that's what he sees.
I think it's as simple as maybe something happens right before death. I doubt if you would be justifying anything.
That's true.
You know,
Yeah.
they say
Yeah.
in the military, in the trenches, there's no agnostics.
There's no agnostics in the trenches.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe your life does flash. I doubt it was any, just not
Yeah.
to steal your thunder.
No,
I think
yeah.
something happens at that last.
I think when you're at death's door, you start to think very clearly.
Yeah.
And all the arguments and self-deception start to waste away.
Yeah.
And again, as he's right here next to this man, he sees something. He sees the 3-year result of this man's ministry, and he sees it in the faces of the people that are there. And he says, wait a second. There's something extraordinarily, supernaturally redemptive about this man. And if that's true, maybe he is the Messiah. I think he can see this from there. So these are all the things that he says in this one very simple phrase right here. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Come into your kingdom. This close to death. When you come into your kingdom. Or a popular Christian writer, he paraphrases this and he says, the thief on the cross says, well, Jesus, when you come into your kingdom, can you put in a good word for me? Will you just remember me? See, he doesn't make any claim about his qualifications or whether he's even really invited, although it looks like he's in the right company based on the people he sees. But he knows they couldn't do anything to purify themselves, and he can't either. And I think that's exactly why this man is here. And I think that's exactly the composition of this king's citizens, the people who are broken. Let's wrap this up. We're losing all the air in the room. Truly I say to you, today you shall be with me in paradise. And so Jesus says, again, that's a striking thing. For the thief on the resurrection comes a couple days early. Ever thought about that? Today, be with me in paradise. Today. Not Resurrection Sunday. By the way, a lot of people have created some goofy theology over the word paradise. And because we don't have much else that's told about what this paradise is. However, the word's very old. It comes out of the Old Testament Hebrew. It actually comes out of before that Persian languages. And it comes from a very simple word that means a green park. Which is, in the ancient thinking, one of the most pleasant places you can be. I mean, you think about it. If you've been to Israel, you know it's a rocky kind of wasteland. It's dust and rocks and rocks and rocks and dust and rocks and, you know. And when you finally see a tree, you see some water, and you see something that looks like a cultivated garden with shade trees and green grass, you go, this is the best place in the world. So paradise just means an incredibly pleasant, wonderful, restful place to be. It's a good place. Now, if you want to get more technical, you can look up in Revelation 2:7. You can do this afterwards. In Revelation 2:7, in the first of the 7 letters to the churches in Revelations, first church city is Ephesus. At the end of the address, the letter to Ephesus, he tells you exactly what the paradise of God is. And I'm not going to tell you. Revelation 2:7. Revelation 2:7. So here's the question we're left with today. Not only the question to us, but the question to the people who were watching what was going on in the hill that day. And as they look at what goes down, they see how Jesus reacts. The question of the day is, who is that man? Who is that guy? We know that the results of what happens on that hill that day, because of how Jesus dies, not only convinces the thief on one side of him, it convinces the Roman centurion who watches him die, who says, surely this must have been the Son of God. What did they see? And I have to believe that not only in observing the life of Jesus, you see the Messiah, but in the death of Jesus, you see the Messiah. He had accusations hurled at him, mockings. They have no record that he said anything back in return. He was silent, in fact, the Old Testament says, like a lamb led to the slaughter. He was silent. He put up with all those accusations, and yet 2 weeks maybe before, he raises Lazarus from the dead after he's been in the tomb for so long that his sister says, Jesus, don't do this. He stinketh. He's rotting. And his reputation is all over the place. The way Jesus dies tells us he died voluntarily, tells us it was the purpose of his life, tells us it was necessary, and as we find in the later versions of what we read in the New Testament, necessary to pay the price for our own sin. Because if he had not done that, then when the king came into his kingdom, there would be no citizens there to qualify to be there. Nobody. Because all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. No one qualifies to be in that kingdom. Because qualification is absolutely 100% perfection, no sin. Who's done that this week? None of us can. But because of our shortfalls, because of the fact that we cannot do it, because we, like the thief on the cross, said, I'm broken too. Can you fix me? Can you pay the price for my brokenness? Which, by the way, I chose on my own. I chose this. Can you fix that? Will you take my sins on yourself and pay the price for my own sins? Will you make me qualified for this kingdom? And Jesus says, yeah, that's why he died. So we'd be qualified. Paul puts it very simply, and this is what we're going to close with. Paul says, who is this man? He opens the book to the city of Rome and he says, Jesus, who was declared the Son of God with power. How? By resurrection from the dead. And Paul says, if you're wondering who Jesus is, wonder about the resurrection of Jesus. Because only the anointed, promised, supernatural king from the Old Testament and into the New, he's the only one that can do that. So you're just still wondering? The power of the resurrection proves who he is. And so throughout the rest of Christianity, as it moves from this place, from the crucifixion of Jesus to the resurrection of Jesus in just a few days, That's the entire question that sweeps the Eastern Mediterranean and then through the East down in India, as well as all the way up into the English Isles and all over the world. The question spreads anywhere. Let me tell you who this Jesus is. Why do you say he's Messiah? He rose from the dead. Fact. In fact, I've heard a well-known Christian apologist say, if the fact of the resurrection is not a fact, if the resurrection never really happened, then you have a historical, sociological problem to explain. And what's that? You have to explain why the entire Mediterranean region and the known parts of the world at the time went absolutely crazy, culturally speaking. They went crazy. Christianity spread throughout the world like wildfire, so incredibly fast, that if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then you have to come up with some other explanation that's as big and as bold and as crazy as that, because it changed the world. And what was it that changed his world? Was it just his good teaching, his wise words? Let's figure in a little bit. But what changed the world is, this is the one. He's the anointed Messiah from all. He's the king. And the king was dead, and the king back alive again, which means the kingdom plans are still on, by the way. They're still on because he came back to life. And he continues to live to this very day, and he wants to be your Lord right now. You can enter his kingdom right now, they would say as they moved all over the world. You can enter his kingdom now because he's living. You can enter it right now by just accepting the fact that he is that king and that he paid for you when you were broken and unworthy to pay for yourself, just like the thief on the cross. Now, a lot of people heard that message throughout the early part of the world back then. And they said, nah, I don't think so. Just like on the scene of the cross. You've got Jesus in the center, and you've got one guy who changes his mind based on what he sees that day, largely in the faces of the people that come to see Jesus, his followers. And then you have a guy on the other side of the cross who sees exactly the same thing, and according to our records, he completely stiff-armed Jesus. And that's what happened in the early church. People who said, I'm either with this thief or I'm with that thief. And that's where we're at. So who is this Jesus? That's the real question. And Paul says it's the resurrection that proves with power he is the Son of God. He is. It's one of the best documented facts in all of history. Even Jesus' enemies documented the fact that the tomb was empty and no one could find Jesus until he showed up and said, I'm here. I'm here. Even the best planned ruse was tell everybody that, here's what you do. Tell everybody that the disciples, those 12 lunatic guys, say the disciples came in the middle of the night and they rolled away the stone because there's 12 of them. That's just about enough to roll away the stone. And they came in and they stole Jesus' body. And then in the morning they came and said, look, there's no Jesus here. He raised from the dead. Tell everybody that. Which, by the way, before we go too far with that argument, Jesus' enemies proved that the tomb was empty because that was what they told everyone. You have to come to an explanation. They actually opened up and said, look, it's empty. They had no clue where he was. The guards could have been killed. There's so many problems with that argument, in fact. And also the biggest problem is that I told you about the fact that Christianity spread throughout the early world and spread like wildfire. You know who spread it? It was the apostles and the other disciples and followers of Jesus who scattered all over the place and told the story of what? What he taught? Some. Who he was? Yes, who he was. And they went everywhere like that. Who can, if you were an apostle and you perpetrated this hoax about stealing the body of Jesus and saying to everybody, look, he raised from the dead, how far would you carry that hoax in your life? Especially if they said, if you keep this up, we're going to kill you. No, actually, we made this plan the night before, and no. All these guys, except John, the apostle, died martyrs' deaths because they wouldn't deny what they saw in the resurrected Jesus. All they had to do is recant it. So you have another historical sociological problem is if that is really the hoax that was perpetrated, then how comes the apostles went as far as they did? That doesn't make any sense. So anyway, I just get back to you today. Who is this man? And as you hang, in a sense, on your own cross, broken, unable to change your circumstance or your brokenness or your worthiness before him, who is this man? And why did he die? But keep in mind also that as the thief was on that cross, he understood well, and it's a fact biblically as well, that we're all broken, but we're all invited. And until you admit your brokenness, that's the sinfulness, you can't accept the invitation. And that was the problem with the thief on the left. Didn't want to admit that brokenness. So as we close right now, I just want to let you know, if you're wondering about this entire thing as well, which one, am I the thief on the left or the thief on the right? Am I the one who's saying, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom? Or I'm the other guy who's throwing accusations saying, hey, you Mr. Messiah, save yourself and us. Come on. Which one are you? And you can do it very simply, just like the thief on the cross did. Come to him privately in prayer and say, yeah, I am unworthy and I'm broken. Even society tells me how broken I am. But I can't seem to fix that myself. And I'm pretty sure I can't fix myself enough to make myself worthy of you. But the fact that you died purposefully for me and for anybody who would admit they're broken tells me that you want me in your kingdom. You are that king. And I want to be part of that kingdom. Because your love demonstrated in your sacrifice for me is mind-blowing. And you can just tell him that privately yourself. And say, Lord, when you come into your kingdom, remember me. And the interesting thing is this. His kingdom doesn't start just when we all die. His kingdom starts the minute you allow him dominion in your heart. A king's dominion is his kingdom. The kingdom of God starts wherever there's followers who follow the king. You can start following him right now, and he can start this life change in you right now. You don't have to wait till you die. But when you do die, it's just another step into more of him. The Apostle Paul says, I'm torn. I don't know which way to go. To live or to die, to live or to die. I don't know, live or to die. If I stay and I live here, it's more benefit to you because I can minister with you. And I have Christ here because he's in me. But if I die, that's even more of Christ. For me to live is Christ, but to die, more of Christ. Gain. He comes to tell us on Resurrection Day, oops, save the guitar, save the guitar. Yeah, he comes to tell us that the invitation is still there. That's what it is. And that his promise in the resurrection is that he is that king and he wants you to be part of his kingdom. But you got to start with the brokenness. That's why we're so excited on Easter. Okay? Let's pray, and then we'll sing one more song this morning. Yeah.
One question.
Sure.
He told the thief that he would be with him that day in paradise.
Right.
And so he told Martha, don't touch me because I haven't ascended to the Father yet.
Yeah.
So when did the transfiguration actually take place? Was it?
His physical transfiguration?
Yeah. Did it take place in heaven or in the tomb itself? Did they take the body up into heaven?
I'll talk to you afterwards about that. That's a great question. That's a great question. Yeah. Good. Did I hurt your guitar? Oh, well, it's Dave's anyway. It's okay. I think we saved it. Okay, let's pray. Father, thank you for this incredible account, and thank you that you have preserved for us the story of these guys on the cross so that we can realize that even for the lowest of the low, even the ones that society itself recognizes and condemns as being hopeless sinners, that still you offer us to be part of that kingdom. And you offer your love in your sacrifice to us in order that we would be qualified through your own payment, through your own suffering, through your own death on the cross, that we might be made worthy and alive through you. Adopted as children, not born privileged sons. And in that adoption, we find life in you. So thank you for the resurrection and for reminding us of the resurrection day. And Lord, we don't fear death anymore because that's just a minor change of venue from having you to having even more of you. And we love you and thank you now for this great work you've done on our behalf. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.